The widow handed me a funeral contract bearing my signature. I had never signed it. Beneath the contract was a withdrawal receipt showing that $42,000 had been removed from a protected family trust account 3 weeks after my wife died. The authorization carried my name. The money had gone to a company owned by my daughter-in-law. And before the night was over, my sons would change the locks on the funeral home I had built, declare me mentally unfit, and invite me to a televised gala where they expected me to surrender everything in front of the city. They believed they had buried me while I was still breathing. They were wrong. My name is Arthur Vale. I was 70 years old when my family decided compassion had become an outdated business model. For 42 years, Vale Family Memorials served a working-class Pennsylvania city called Bellwether. My late wife, Miriam, and I started with 1 borrowed hearse, 6 folding chairs, and a building that smelled of wet plaster whenever it rained. We did not become famous. We became trusted. When a steelworker died before his pension began, Miriam found a way to reduce the service price without making his widow feel poor. When a child lost a parent, I learned to kneel before speaking because bad news should never tower over someone small. When families prepaid for future services, Miriam treated every dollar as though it belonged to someone standing in the room. Because it did. By the time our sons were adults, the business occupied 3 connected buildings and employed 38 people. The original funeral home remained on Ashland Avenue. A cremation center stood behind it. Across town, my older son Nolan had opened a luxury memorial complex with marble walls, digital tribute screens, and a fountain that cost more than Miriam and I had spent launching the entire company. They named it Vale Serenity Pavilion. Miriam would have hated the word pavilion. She believed grieving people needed clear directions, comfortable chairs, and coffee that did not taste burned. She did not believe they needed imported stone. She died 18 months before everything fell apart. Cancer moved quickly at the end. During her final week, she asked me to promise 2 things. First, never let the company shame a family for what it could not afford. Second, never assume our children would protect something merely because they inherited it. At the time, I told her she was being too hard on the boys. That memory would later become one of the most painful forms of proof. Nolan was 44, polished, persuasive, and comfortable in expensive rooms. He had become chief executive 3 years before Miriam died. His wife, Celeste, served as financial director. She had an elegant way of saying cruel things as though she were explaining weather. My younger son, Eric, was 39 and managed operations. Eric had always been gentler than Nolan, but gentleness without courage can become another tool for harmful people. He avoided conflict so consistently that eventually he began signing whatever would make conflict leave the room. My granddaughter Mara was 16. She was Nolan and Celeste's only child, a quiet girl who photographed old buildings and wrote down conversations people assumed she had forgotten. The week before the widow appeared, Vale Serenity Pavilion held its grand opening. 200 guests filled the new reception hall. Investors, hospital administrators, local officials, clergy, reporters, and business owners moved beneath crystal lights while servers carried glasses of sparkling wine. My photograph appeared on a history wall near the entrance. In it, I was 28, holding a paintbrush beside the original Ashland building. Miriam stood on a ladder behind me, laughing because I had stepped into a bucket. The caption read, "The humble beginning." Celeste had chosen the words. I was standing near that photograph when she took the stage. She thanked the investors first. Then the architects. Then the consulting firm that had developed what she called our premium grief experience model. Finally, she looked toward me. "And we should acknowledge Arthur," she said. "Our retired attendant, who still believes kindness pays the bills." People laughed. Some laughed because she was smiling. Some laughed because powerful people often teach a room what is safe to find funny. Nolan stood beside her. He did not correct the word attendant. He did not remind anyone that my name was on the company because I had built it. He lifted his glass. That silence hurt more than Celeste's sentence. I had washed my own preparation room floors. I had repaired furnaces before morning services. I had driven through snow to collect a man whose family had no one else to call. Attendant was not an insult. The insult was using service to make a servant small. Celeste continued. Arthur represents where we came from. Tonight represents where we are going. Behind her, the screen changed from my old photograph to an image of 5 planned Vale locations across the state. I recognized only 2 addresses. The other 3 were cities where we owned no buildings and held no leases. A map flashed for less than 4 seconds. That was long enough. When the applause began, I found Eric near the catering entrance. When did we acquire properties in Wilkes-Barre, Erie, and Lancaster? I asked. His expression changed before he answered. They are development targets. The presentation called them active locations. Marketing simplified it. Marketing is not supposed to simplify property into existence. He lowered his voice. Dad, not tonight. Then tomorrow. He looked past me toward Celeste. Tomorrow may be complicated. I asked what that meant. He said, Nolan has papers for you. That was the first rehook, though I did not know it then. The second came before sunrise. At 7 the next morning, my key would not open the Ashland funeral home. I tried the front entrance, the side door, and the employee's entrance beside the garage. All 3 locks had been changed. A cardboard box sat beneath the awning. Inside were my framed license, 2 suits, Miriam's brass desk clock, and the photograph of us beside the borrowed hearse. On top lay a white envelope. Arthur Vale, retirement transition. Nolan arrived 10 minutes later in a black sedan. Eric sat in the passenger seat but did not get out. Celeste came separately, carrying a leather folder. You changed the locks, I said. Nolan adjusted his coat. We secured the premises. From me? From confusion. Celeste opened the folder. Arthur, there have been concerns about your judgment. Repeated unannounced visits. Contradictory instructions to employees. Questions about accounts you no longer supervise. I asked about 3 imaginary buildings. Development stage properties, she said. Where are the contracts? That is exactly the kind of operational interference the board wants resolved. She handed me a document 63 pages long. The first pages use soft language. Legacy transition. Advisory retirement. Family continuity. The middle pages transferred my voting shares to Nolan, my ownership of the Ashland building into a company controlled by Celeste, and my authority over prepaid service trusts to the executive committee. The final attachment was a letter from Dr. Lowell Crane, a neurologist I had never met. It described me as forgetful, emotionally volatile, and unable to understand complex financial decisions. I looked at Nolan. Did you pay a doctor to diagnose me without examining me? He reviewed family reports, Nolan said. Whose family? Eric finally stepped out of the car. His face was pale. Dad, please sign the temporary agreement. We can revisit details later. Temporary agreements do not transfer buildings. Celeste gave a small sigh. The Ashland property is underutilized. Serenity Pavilion carries significant expansion costs. We need flexibility. You need my building. The company needs alignment. And the prepaid trusts? No one answered. That silence changed the question into evidence. I closed the folder. No. Nolan stepped closer. You cannot keep holding the company hostage because you are grieving Mom. Your mother is the reason the company still has a conscience. Conscience does not service debt. There it was. Debt. The first honest word anyone had spoken. How much? I asked. Celeste took the folder from my hand. This conversation is no longer productive. How much debt? Nolan's jaw tightened. Enough that your refusal could destroy what we built. I looked at the box containing 42 years of work reduced to objects they no longer wanted inside. You did not build the old business, I said. Nolan answered, we built the valuable one. Then he told me I was no longer permitted on company property without written authorization. My sons left me beneath the awning. Rain began before I reached my truck. I had spent decades making sure no family left our doors carrying more humiliation than grief had already given them. That morning, my own children sent me away with a cardboard box. But the lockout was not the worst thing they had done. The widow would show me that by sunset. I drove first to my sister Ruth's house. Ruth was 66, widowed, and living alone in a 4-bedroom colonial our parents had left her. We had argued over small things and forgiven each other for large ones. I believed that was what siblings did. She opened the door halfway. Her eyes went immediately to the cardboard box in my arms. Nolan called, she said. That sentence told me the conversation had begun without me. I need somewhere to sleep for a few nights. Ruth looked toward her living room, though no one else was there. Arthur, I do not want to be pulled into a fight between you and the boys. I am asking for a bed, not a legal opinion. You have money. Stay at a hotel. My personal account was frozen this morning. Celeste says it is connected to the company review. Ruth frowned, but not with surprise. That detail stayed with me. Maybe you should sign, she said. You are 70. Let them run things. They changed the locks. Because you would not let go. Did Nolan tell you that? He told me you have been confused. I laughed, though nothing was funny. Do I seem confused? People do not always know. She had memorized the doctor's language. I looked through the doorway at the staircase where our children once slid down on sleeping bags during Christmas dinners. One night, Ruth. Her hand tightened on the door. I am sorry. I cannot reward stubbornness. She closed it gently. People imagine betrayal arrives with shouting. Often it arrives in a careful voice because the person delivering it wants to keep thinking of herself as kind. I slept that night in a small room behind St. Agnes Church. Reverend Denise Hart found me sitting in my truck outside the parish hall. I had arranged services with Denise for 15 years. She asked one question. Do you need advice or a key? A key. She gave me one. The room had a narrow bed, a desk, and a radiator that knocked every 20 minutes as though someone were trapped inside it. I placed Miriam's brass clock beside the bed. At 11:12, it stopped. I wound it twice. Nothing. For the first time since the lockout, I cried. Not loudly. Grief at 70 is practiced. It knows how to sit without disturbing the walls. The next morning, I repaired the clock. A gear had slipped. That mattered to me more than it should have. Something could stop without being finished. St. Agnes owned a 12-passenger shuttle van that had not run in 3 years. It sat behind the parish hall beneath a maple tree, collecting leaves and bird droppings. Denise wanted to sell it for scrap. I asked for 1 week. The battery was dead, 2 tires were cracked, and mice had built a nest inside the air filter. The fuel pump needed replacing. The side door would not close. I knew how to repair everything except the rust beneath the rear step. For that, I called Samuel Ortiz. Samuel had worked at Vale Family Memorials for 17 years before Celeste fired him. She claimed his driving record increased insurance costs. The truth was that Samuel had questioned a transfer from the prepaid service accounts. He arrived with a welding mask and did not ask why I was living behind a church. He simply said, "Where is the rust?" By Friday, the van ran. Denise used it to take elderly parishioners to medical appointments. Then a hospital social worker asked whether we could transport a woman to her husband's memorial because she could not afford a wheelchair service. We did. The next call came from a family whose car had broken down the morning of a burial. Then from a veteran's residence. Then from a hospice nurse who needed someone to help an elderly man collect documents from a courthouse. Within 3 weeks, the old van was moving every day. Denise painted Last Kindness Community Transport on the side. I disliked the name at first. "It sounds final," I told her. "Kindness is never final," she said. "It is simply the last thing someone remembers when everything else fails." Samuel began volunteering 3 mornings a week. Judith Lane, a widowed accountant who had handled payroll for Miriam years earlier, offered to organize donations. A young man named Theo Brooks started washing the van after Denise found him sleeping in the church laundry room. Theo was 18 and had aged out of foster care with 1 backpack, an expired bus pass, and a talent for fixing electronics. I offered him hourly work. He asked, "Doing what?" "Anything useful." "What if I do not know how?" "Then the first useful thing is learning." The Last Kindness did not make money. It made movement. People who had been stranded reached places they needed to reach. That was enough to make the days feel less like exile. Then Beatrice Cole walked into the church office carrying a contract with my forged signature. She was 74, small, sharply dressed, and furious enough to make the room seem warmer. Her husband, Henry, had prepaid for both of their future services 12 years earlier. He had died the previous weekend. Vale Serenity Pavilion told her no account existed. They presented a new estimate for $42,000. "I already paid," she said. Judith offered her a chair. Beatrice remained standing. "Your daughter-in-law told me the old contracts were informal promises. She said your bookkeeping was unreliable near the end of your career." "May I see the contract?" The original bore our old gold seal and Miriam's handwriting in the margins. The terms were correct. The account number was real. My signature was not. Someone had copied the broad shape but missed the downward pressure in the final E. Attached was a bank receipt showing that Henry and Beatrice had deposited $42,000 into the protected trust. A second page showed a withdrawal made 18 months earlier. Authorized by Arthur Vale. Transferred to Solace Development Services. Judith took one look at the company name and went still. "I have seen that vendor," she said. "Where?" "In the annual statements Celeste sent former employees. Consulting fees. Hundreds of thousands." Beatrice reached into her handbag. "There is more." She placed an old mobile phone on the desk. "Miriam left me a voicemail 3 months before she died. I did not understand why she sounded frightened." The recording was weak but clear. Miriam said, "Beatrice, keep your original contract somewhere outside your home. Do not give Vale the only copy. If anyone tells you the account disappeared, ask Arthur about the blue ledger. Do not ask the boys." My wife had known. Not everything. But enough to leave warnings. I replayed the final sentence. Ask Arthur about the blue ledger. I had never seen a blue ledger. Before I could answer Beatrice, the church office door opened. Mara stood there wearing her school uniform and carrying Miriam's wooden recipe box. My granddaughter looked at Beatrice's contract. Then at the phone. "Grandma knew they were stealing," she said. She closed the door behind her. "And my mother ordered me to burn the proof." Mara set the recipe box on the desk. Miriam had kept family recipes on index cards for decades. Lemon cake, potato rolls, chicken soup. Things no one in our family cooked correctly after she died. Mara lifted out the cards. Beneath them was a false wooden bottom. Inside lay a narrow blue ledger, a safe deposit key, and 3 sealed envelopes. One envelope had my name. One was addressed to Mara. The third read, "For the trustees, if Arthur chooses the families." I sat down before opening mine. Miriam's handwriting began firmly and weakened across the pages. "Arthur, if you are reading this, then I ran out of time or courage. I hope only time." She wrote that 6 months before her diagnosis, she noticed irregular withdrawals from prepaid accounts. Small amounts at first. Then larger transfers labeled technology upgrades, facility development, and consultant reimbursements. When she questioned Celeste, the records disappeared from the accounting portal. When she questioned Nolan, he told her growth required temporary flexibility. Miriam copied what she could. She did not confront me because I had just undergone heart surgery and she believed the problem could be corrected quietly. That sentence made me angry with the dead. Love sometimes becomes secrecy because the person hiding the truth imagines protection and does not have to live long enough to see the cost. The letter continued. "I made the mistake of believing our sons would stop before hurting families. If they have not stopped, the blue ledger contains account numbers and dates. The key belongs to a box at Commonwealth Union Bank. Do not open it alone. Take Judith." At the bottom, Miriam had written one line twice. "Kindness without accountability becomes permission." Mara opened her envelope. She read silently, then pressed the paper to her chest. "What did she say?" I asked. "That being young does not make me responsible for fixing adults." Mara tried to smile. She knew I would try. I asked what Celeste had ordered her to burn. The night after the Serenity Pavilion opening, Mara had gone to the Ashland Funeral Home to retrieve a camera she had left in my office. She found Celeste, Nolan, and Eric sorting old files. Boxes marked prepaid trust stood beside an industrial shredder. Mara hid in the records corner and recorded part of their conversation on her phone. Celeste said, "Anything before the software conversion has to disappear before Arthur sees the withdrawals." Nolan asked, "What about Mom's handwritten records?" Eric answered, "She kept copies at home." Celeste said, "Then search the house again. If Mara has the recipe box, get it from her." Mara had taken the box from Miriam's closet after the funeral because it smelled faintly of cinnamon. Celeste searched her bedroom the next day. Mara moved the box to a school photography locker. "Why come now?" I asked. "Because Mom told Dad the gala cannot happen until you sign. She said if you do not sign by Friday, the bank will discover the trust shortage." "What gala?" "The Founders' Legacy Gala. They are announcing your retirement and the sale of Ashland." I had not been invited. Mara looked toward Beatrice. "Mom said they need Grandpa on stage because families still trust him." Beatrice's laugh contained no humor. "Not for long." Judith opened the ledger. Miriam had listed 116 accounts with notes besides suspicious transfers. Beatrice and Henry Cole appeared on page 14. Withdrawn, $42,000. Destination, Solace Development Services. Initials, CV. Another family had lost $68,000. Another, $19,000. Some accounts had been emptied completely. Others had been reduced just enough that annual statements could hide the missing balance behind projected growth. The total in Miriam's handwriting was $2,784,000. The ledger ended 10 months before her death. We had no idea what happened afterward. Judith closed it. "This is not bad management," she said. "This is theft from protected trusts." Samuel stood near the door. "How many families?" "At least 116. Beatrice sat down at last. Her anger changed into something heavier. "My husband trusted you," she said. "The word you included all of us. Our name was on the contract. My son's crimes did not stop being connected to me because I had not known. I asked Mara to remain at the church until Nolan arrived. She refused. If I go home, Mom will take my phone. She is still your mother. That does not make her safe." The sentence came from a 16-year-old who had already learned a truth adults often resist for decades. Reverend Denise called a family attorney. Mara contacted her maternal aunt, who agreed to collect her and keep her for the night. Before leaving, Mara caught my sleeve. "Grandpa, do not make a quiet deal. I am not planning one. Dad always cries when he thinks he will lose something. Then people forgive him before he returns it." She gave me the phone containing the recording. "Make him return it first." That evening, Judith and I went to Commonwealth Union Bank. The safe deposit key opened a box registered jointly to Miriam and me. I had signed the original paperwork years earlier and forgotten it existed. Inside were copied bank statements, genuine samples of my signature, emails printed from Miriam's account, and the original documents creating the Vale Community Trust. Miriam had revised the trust 4 years before her death. The Ashland property, our professional licenses, our trademarks, and the original company shares sat within it. I remained lifetime trustee. Nolan and Eric were named successor managers under ordinary conditions. But Section 11 changed everything. If any family officer knowingly misused prepaid client funds, forged a trustee authorization, or attempted to obtain trust property through fraud or incapacity manipulation, control transferred permanently to a non-profit board composed of 3 employees, 2 client representatives, 1 clergy member, and 1 independent accountant. The family would lose control. All of us. Including me. The trust would continue operating the funeral home, recover diverted assets, restore client accounts, and provide reduced-cost services through a community fund. Judith read the clause twice. Miriam built a trapdoor. "No," I said. "She built a fire exit." The sealed envelope for the trustees contained a signed statement describing her suspicions and instructing them to act only if I verified the evidence and voluntarily activated the clause. She had left the decision to me. That was not mercy. It was responsibility. If I activated Section 11 immediately, the board would seize control, banks would freeze accounts, and investigators would descend on Vale family memorials. That could save what remained. It could also shut down services already scheduled, strand employees without payroll, and send frightened families searching for new providers in the middle of loss. Judith understood the problem. "We need a controlled transition," she said. "We need proof current enough that Celeste cannot call this Miriam's old suspicion. The ledger and recordings are strong. Strong is not complete." The bank manager joined us after Judith requested records connected to the trust. He was unable to disclose company accounts without formal authority, But he confirmed something worse. 3 weeks earlier, Celeste had submitted documents requesting a refinancing package secured by the Ashland property and the remaining prepaid balances. The guarantee carried my notarized signature. I had never seen it. Closing was scheduled for Friday morning. The gala was Thursday night. They planned to display me to the public, obtain my signature or create the appearance of consent, and close the loan before anyone could object. We had 48 hours. That was when I stopped thinking like a father hoping his sons would confess. I began thinking like a funeral director preparing a room where no lie could remain hidden. The plan depended on making my sons believe I had finally become the frightened old man they had described. I called Nolan at 8 the next morning. He answered with, "Where is Mara?" Not hello. Not are you all right? Safe, I said. Celeste is losing her mind. Mara took private company materials. She took her grandmother's recipe box. Silence. Then Nolan's voice softened. Dad, this has gone too far. Let us finish it tonight. Come to Serenity Pavilion. Sign the transition. We will restore your personal account and arrange a comfortable apartment. I want the gala. He paused. What? Mara told me you planned a Founder's Legacy Gala. If I surrender the company, I will do it publicly. Invite the board, employees, investors, clergy, and client families. I want people to see that I chose peace. Nolan covered the phone and spoke to someone. Celeste, probably. When he returned, suspicion had entered his voice. Why would you want that? Because you were right. I built the old business. You built the valuable one. I would like one evening where people thank me before I disappear. Vanity is the lie vain people trust most easily in others. Nolan exhaled. 7 tomorrow night. I want the transfer documents projected before I sign. Why? So no one says later that I did not understand. That sentence appealed to the story they had already created about me. He agreed. Within an hour, Celeste's public relations team announced that Arthur Vale would formally bless the company's expansion during a live-streamed gala. My photograph appeared on social media beneath the words "A legacy secured." Meanwhile, Judith contacted the State Funeral Board, the Attorney General's Financial Crimes Division, the bank's fraud department, and the independent trustees named in Miriam's documents. We did not ask for theatrical arrests. We asked for witnesses, account preservation, and a plan that kept families served and employees paid. Beatrice agreed to attend. So did 14 other clients whose contracts had been denied or reduced. Samuel contacted employees he trusted. 3 had copies of payment requests Celeste ordered them to process. 1 former bookkeeper, Leah Morrison, had saved emails because Celeste blamed her for discrepancies and fired her. Leah's records showed current prepaid account withdrawals totaling another $1.9 million after Miriam's ledger ended. The missing amount was now nearly $4.7 million. Solace Development Services received most of it. Thea searched public corporate filings, legally this time, and discovered that Solace belonged to Celeste's cousin through a Nevada holding company. Another shell entity owned the websites for the 3 imaginary funeral homes shown at the grand opening. The locations were not merely unfinished. They were inventions used to support loan applications. Then Judith found the escape plan. Celeste had reserved a furnished apartment in Lisbon for 6 months under her maiden name. A transfer instruction directed $700,000 from Solace to a Portuguese account the morning after the refinancing closed. The beneficiary was Celeste alone. Nolan was not fleeing with her. She planned to leave him holding the company, the debt, and the forged approvals. I expected satisfaction. Instead, I felt tired. My son had helped steal from grieving people and was still being used by someone he believed made him powerful. A fool can also be guilty. That distinction mattered. Eric came to the church that afternoon. He entered through the side door, removed his coat, and stood beside the repaired shuttle van without speaking. "Did Nolan send you?" I asked. "No." "Celeste?" "She thinks I am meeting a vendor." "Which imaginary location?" He closed his eyes. "Dad, I need to know what you have." "Why?" "Because if there is still a way to fix this privately." Beatrice Cole paid $42,000. Your company asked her to pay again while her husband was waiting for a service. What part belongs in private?" His face collapsed. "I did not know about her." "Which families did you know about?" Eric sat on the van's rear step. He admitted seeing unusual transfers 2 years earlier. Celeste told him the trust allowed temporary intercompany loans. Nolan said Serenity Pavilion would generate enough profit to replace everything before annual audits. Eric signed 3 approvals. Then 6. Then 12. When he realized balances were not being restored, he threatened to tell me. Nolan showed him the incapacity plan. "He said if you fought us, the doctor would certify you and the court would remove you anyway," Eric whispered. "He said telling you would only humiliate you. So you protected me by helping them steal my name." I was scared. Everyone in this story was scared. Only the clients were expected to pay for it. He cried. Mar had warned me about that. Dad always cries when he thinks he will lose something. I waited. Eventually, Eric said, "What do you want me to do?" "Tell the truth at the gala." "They will arrest me." "Possibly." "I could lose my license." "Probably." "You are my father." "That is why I am giving you the chance to stand up before someone drags you up." He looked at the church windows. "Will you forgive me?" That question is trying to skip several steps. "What steps?" Confession. Restitution. Consequence. Change. Ask me afterward. Eric left without promising anything. That night, Ruth called. She had heard about the gala. "Nolan says you are signing." "He says many things." "Arthur, please do not embarrass the family." "How much did they pay you?" The silence lasted 9 seconds. I counted. "I do not know what you mean." "My personal account was frozen before I reached your house. You were not surprised. You repeated the doctor's language. How much?" Her breath changed. "It was not payment. Nolan helped me refinance." "How much?" $50,000. I sat in the church office while Theo cleaned the van outside. "For what?" "He asked me to encourage you to retire. He said you were endangering everyone's jobs." "Did he ask you to refuse me a bed?" "No." That answer was worse. The money explained manipulation. It did not explain the door. "Come to the gala," I said. "Why?" "Return the money and tell the truth." "In public?" "You advised me in private. You abandoned me in private. The consequences have become public." She began to protest. I ended the call. The strongest rehook came 6 hours before the gala. Mara brought me a second recording. She had left her phone charging in Celeste's office during the grand opening. The device captured Celeste and Dr. Crane speaking after everyone left. Dr. Crane said, "I can support mild impairment. I cannot support incompetence without an examination." Celeste answered, "You are not being paid for a diagnosis. You are being paid for a conclusion." Then Nolan asked, "What happens if he refuses to sign at the gala?" Celeste said, "We use the notarized version. The live appearance only proves he was present and cooperative." They already had a forged signed agreement. The gala was not meant to obtain my consent. It was meant to manufacture witnesses who believed they had seen it. If I merely refused on stage, they would claim confusion, remove me, and close the refinancing with a forgery the next morning. We needed them to display the document. We needed the notary. And we needed Celeste to believe the room still belonged to her. At 7 that evening, Vale Serenity Pavilion glowed like a palace built for people who had forgotten why they were inside. Black cars lined the drive. Cameras stood near the marble staircase. Employees wore formal uniforms. A string quartet played beside the fountain. My cardboard box had been hidden. My portrait now stood at the entrance beneath white flowers. For one unsettling moment, it looked like my own memorial. Celeste met me near the doors. She wore dark green and smiled for the cameras. "Arthur, you look well. The neurologist will be disappointed." Her smile tightened. Nolan embraced me while photographers watched. His hand trembled against my back. Eric stood 10 feet away. He would not meet my eyes. Mara entered with her maternal aunt and sat beside Beatrice. Ruth arrived alone, carrying a cashier's check in a white envelope. Judith sat near the trustees. Samuel and Leah joined the employees. The financial crimes investigators did not wear jackets marked with their agency. They looked like attorneys, bank officials, and unremarkable guests. That was more useful. At 7:40, Celeste began the presentation. She spoke about innovation, regional growth, and protecting family legacy. The screen displayed the 5-location map again. 3 ghosts presented as businesses. Then Nolan introduced me. "My father taught us that every life deserves dignity," he said. "Tonight, he demonstrates that same dignity by passing leadership to the future." Applause filled the hall. I walked to the stage carrying Miriam's blue ledger. Celeste noticed it. For the first time, she looked afraid. "Before I sign," I said, "I want the entire agreement displayed, exactly as it will be filed." Nolan glanced at Celeste. She nodded to the technician. The retirement agreement appeared on the screen. Page 1. Then the signature page. There was my forged name. There was the notary seal. And there was yesterday's date. A murmur moved through the room. I turned to Nolan. "Interesting. I seem to have signed this yesterday while sleeping behind St. Agnes Church." Celeste stepped toward the microphone. "That is a draft image. Then let us compare drafts." Theo, stationed at the presentation computer with the venue technician, replaced the screen. Beatrice Cole's original contract appeared beside the withdrawal receipt. Then came Miriam's ledger. Then the bank transfers. Then Solace Development Services. Then the 3 imaginary locations. Then the Portugal transfer instruction. Celeste reached for the control tablet. The technician moved it out of reach. She whispered, "Turn this off." He answered, "I cannot. The feed is mirrored." Every image was already streaming to the bank, trustees, investigators, and thousands of online viewers. The room no longer belonged to her. Celeste recovered quickly. People who survive by controlling stories do not surrender when facts first appear. They create a new story. She faced the audience. Arthur has been collecting private records during a period of documented cognitive decline, she said. This presentation combines outdated files, stolen materials, and misunderstandings about lawful intercompany financing. I nodded toward the screen. Dr. Crane's letter appeared. Then Mara's recording played through the hall. The doctor's voice said, "I cannot support incompetence without an examination." Celeste's voice answered, "You are not being paid for a diagnosis. You are being paid for a conclusion." Dr. Crane was seated near the back. He stood so suddenly that his chair struck the wall. 2 investigators approached him before he reached the exit. Celeste turned toward Mara. "You recorded your own mother?" Mara's hands shook, but her voice did not. "I recorded people planning to lie about Grandpa." Nolan stepped between them. "Enough. She is a child." Mara looked at him. "I was a child when you searched my room for Grandma's box." The sentence silenced him. Beatrice walked onto the stage carrying Henry's contract. She did not ask permission. "My husband paid this company 12 years ago," she said. "Last week, your wife told me the money never existed. Which part is a misunderstanding? The deposit, the withdrawal, or the second bill?" Other families stood. A man held up a denied contract for his mother. A woman raised an annual statement showing a balance the bank no longer recognized. 14 families became 14 witnesses. Celeste looked at Nolan. "Tell them the board approved temporary transfers." Nolan moved toward the microphone. For a moment, I believed he would confess. Instead, he pointed at Eric. "Operations certified the accounts. Eric signed every release." Eric stared at his brother. The final door stood open before him. He could remain the quiet son who let louder people choose his crimes. Or he could enter consequences under his own name. Eric walked to the stage. "I signed 12 releases," he said. "I knew the balances were not being restored. Nolan told me Serenity Pavilion would cover the shortage. Celeste created the vendors. I stayed silent because they promised me control of the western locations." He looked at the map. "I later learned those locations did not exist. I still said nothing." Nolan grabbed his arm. "Stop talking." Eric removed his hand. "No." It was a small word. It arrived years late. But it was his. Celeste turned on Nolan next. "Do not pretend you were manipulated. You signed the guarantees. You approved the withdrawals." Nolan's face changed as he realized she had no intention of protecting him. "I displayed the Lisbon lease and the Portuguese transfer instruction." His name appeared nowhere. He read the beneficiary line twice. "You were leaving," he whispered. Celeste said nothing. "You were putting all of it on me." "You are the chief executive," she replied. "Responsibility comes with the title." The cruelty of that answer was almost elegant. She had taught him to believe titles transferred worth. Now she used his title to transfer her guilt. Ruth rose from the audience. She looked smaller than she had on her porch. "I accepted $50,000 from Nolan," she said. "He called it refinancing help. In return, I agreed to persuade Arthur to sign and repeat concerns about his memory. When he asked to stay in my house, I refused him. No one ordered me to do that." She placed the cashier's check on the stage. "I am returning the money." I did not thank her. Truth is required before repair. It is not itself repair. Celeste reached for her handbag. An investigator stopped her and asked her to leave it on the chair. She demanded an attorney. That was the first sensible thing she had said. The lead bank investigator announced that the refinancing had been suspended and the disputed accounts frozen. A representative from the State Funeral Board confirmed that Vale's licenses would remain active under emergency supervision so scheduled services could continue. Then Judith carried Miriam's sealed trustee envelope to the stage. I opened the final document. "This is Section 11 of the Vale Community Trust," I said. "Miriam created it because she understood something I did not. A family name is not a guarantee of family character." The screen displayed the clause: misuse of client funds, forged trustee authorization, incapacity manipulation, permanent transfer to non-profit control. Nolan stared at me. "Dad, do not do this. We can repay it. Sell Serenity. Restructure. Give us time." "Beatrice's husband already ran out of time. You will lose the company too." "Yes." He stopped. He had assumed ownership mattered to me more than service because ownership mattered most to him. I signed the activation. The Ashland property, company licenses, trademarks, and my controlling shares transferred into the nonprofit trust. 3 employees, 2 client representatives, Reverend Denise, and Judith became the interim board. My sons lost control. Celeste lost control. And so did I. The audience remained quiet while the paper moved from my hand to the trustees. There was no victory music. No applause at first. Only the sound of one institution changing owners because a family had failed the people who trusted it. Then Beatrice began clapping. Samuel joined her. Employees stood. Families stood. The applause did not belong to me. It belonged to the possibility that their money, contracts, and dignity might survive us. Investigators escorted Celeste, Nolan, and Dr. Crane into separate rooms for questioning. Eric went voluntarily with an attorney Judith had contacted. Ruth remained seated after the hall emptied. Mara approached me near Miriam's portrait. "Did we win?" she asked. "No." Her face fell. "Then what happened?" "We stopped losing in the same direction." That was the most honest answer I had. The investigation lasted 14 months. Forensic accountants recovered $3.1 million from Solace accounts, property deposits, and frozen transfers. Insurance and asset sales restored most of the remaining shortage. No family with a valid prepaid contract was asked to pay twice. Vale Serenity Pavilion was sold. The fountain went to a hotel. The marble lobby became a rehabilitation clinic. The original Ashland Funeral Home remained open under the Vale Community Trust, though the new board eventually changed the name to Ashland Community Memorials. I supported the decision. A name that had protected families should not be used to hide what our family did to them. Celeste pleaded guilty to trust fraud, wire fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. She received the longest sentence because the shell companies, false locations, and foreign transfer plan began with her. Nolan fought the charges for 6 months, then cooperated after the evidence showed he had approved withdrawals and the false incapacity strategy. His sentence was shorter than Celeste's and longer than he believed a son of mine should receive. The judge did not consider genealogy a defense. Eric pleaded guilty to false filings and conspiracy. He avoided prison because he cooperated early, surrendered his license, and agreed to years of restitution and supervised service. Dr. Crane lost his medical license and was convicted of participating in the fraudulent incapacity scheme. Ruth returned the money and testified. She was not charged, but our relationship did not return with the cashier's check. For a year, she sent letters. I read them. I did not confuse reading with reconciliation. Mara lived with her maternal aunt during the case, then spent weekends helping at the Last Kindness. She completed high school early and began studying forensic accounting. Someone has to understand the numbers before another grandmother hides them in a recipe box, she said. The Last Kindness grew faster than I expected. Donations paid for 2 additional vans. We transported elderly clients, grieving families, foster youth, and people leaving hospitals with nowhere reliable to go. Theo earned his commercial license and became our first paid driver. Samuel managed vehicle maintenance. Judith divided her time between the non-profit and the memorial trust. I never returned as owner of the funeral home. I returned sometimes as a volunteer. I swept floors. I arranged chairs. I made coffee that did not taste burned. No one called me an attendant as an insult again. 3 years after the gala, Nolan was released. He came to St. Agnes on a cold Monday morning wearing a borrowed coat and carrying a folder of release papers. He looked older than his age. Prison had not made him humble automatically. Suffering does not improve everyone. Sometimes it only removes the audience. He stood beside the first shuttle van, which Theo was preparing to retire. "I need work," Nolan said. "What kind?" "I can manage operations, fundraising, expansion. I know the industry." "You are barred from managing licensed trusts." "The Last Kindness is transportation. It is also trust." His face tightened. "I served my sentence." "Yes. You said people can change." "They can." "Then give me a chance." I handed him a bucket, cleaning cloths, and the van keys. "Wash the interior. Check every seatbelt. Load the folding chairs. We leave for the veterans' residence at 8. He stared at the bucket. "You want your own son cleaning a van?" "I want to see whether my son can complete work no one applauds." "After everything, you would make me start at the bottom?" "The bottom is where people learn whether they came to serve or only to be seen serving." For a moment, I thought he would leave. Then he removed his coat, rolled up his sleeves, and opened the van door. I did not call that redemption. It was one Monday. Change earns its name through repetition. That afternoon, Mara brought Miriam's recipe box to my room behind the church. We had never replaced the false bottom. While cleaning it, she found one index card stuck beneath the wooden edge. Miriam had written on the blank side, "A family tradition survives only when each generation remembers that serving people matters more than owning the room." Mara read it aloud. Then she asked, "Do you think Grandma knew exactly what would happen?" "No." "Then why did she write so many warnings?" I placed the card beside the repaired brass clock. "Because love does not predict every fire. It makes sure someone remembers where the exits are." The widow's contract still hangs in the office of Ashland Community Memorials. Not as evidence. As a promise. Beneath it is a small sign, "Paid trust is a family's property, not our opportunity." Sometimes people ask whether I regret giving up the company. I tell them I did not give it up. I removed it from the hands of people who believed inheritance meant permission. Sometimes they ask whether I forgave my sons. I tell them forgiveness is not a door I opened once. It is a hallway. Eric has walked farther down it than Nolan. Nolan is still near the entrance. I no longer drag either of them forward. Miriam was right about kindness. Without accountability, it becomes permission. But accountability without humanity becomes another kind of vanity, a way to enjoy being correct while someone else remains broken. So I learned to hold both. I testified truthfully. I let the law do its work. I protected the families. I gave my sons no executive chairs, no hidden money, and no shortcut around what they had done. But when one of them arrived ready to perform honest work, I left the van door open. My family tried to bury me beneath a false diagnosis, forged signatures, and a public retirement. They forgot what 42 years beside grieving people had taught me. A burial is not the same as disappearance. The truth has a way of returning to the surface. And when it did, I did not use it to reclaim the room. I used it to make sure the room would never belong to one family again. 1 year after Nolan began cleaning vans, Beatrice asked me to attend the dedication of a small garden behind the Ashland building. The non-profit board had planted white roses, Miriam's favorite, beside a stone bench bearing Henry's name. Beatrice stood there with her grandchildren while employees carried coffee and folded programs between the chairs. Nolan arrived early in a last kindness uniform. He checked the wheelchair ramp twice, then helped an elderly man from the van without looking around to see who noticed. That mattered. Aaron came later and sat near the back. Ruth stood beside him. We greeted one another politely. Some relationships do not return to their original shape. They become something smaller, more careful, and perhaps more honest. After the dedication, Beatrice touched my sleeve. "Henry would have liked this," she said. "I hope so. He would also have told you to stop standing and sit down." I sat beside her on the stone bench. Children moved between the roses. Mara photographed the old brick wall. Nolan loaded empty cups into a box. No one asked him to speak. Beatrice said, "Your family nearly took everything from you." I looked toward the building. "They took my certainty. That was not everything." "What did you keep?" I thought about Miriam's ledger, Thea's first paycheck, Mara's courage, Eric's confession, and a van door opening before sunrise. "The part that could still be useful," I said. "The brass clock in my room still loses 3 minutes each month. I correct it by hand. I no longer consider that a defect. Some things remain reliable not because they never drift, but because someone keeps noticing and setting them right." That is how institutions survive. It is also how families might. Not through names on buildings. Not through inherited chairs. Through people willing to notice the error, tell the truth about the time, and begin again without pretending nothing stopped. That evening, before locking the church office, I turned Miriam's card toward the lamp. The ink had faded, but the message remained: ownership ends, service continues, and an open door matters only when someone frightened is allowed through it.